two chapters today, and that's Owls and Out of the Fire. And Out of the Fire, of course, is an interesting chapter title simply because it's playing with the out of the frying pan into the fire concept and screwing with it royally. So, of course, it does represent, quite literally, Harry getting pulled out of the fire. But that doesn't seem to be just where it ends, even though Harry's literally pulled out of the fire. Figuratively, of course, they're still in it. Or seem to be. It then becomes a question of, is out of the fire purely literal in this sense, or is it figurative? And if so, what actually is the fire? Because generally the fire is considered the worst place to be. It's not the preference, because you really do have, you're in the frying pan, and that's uncomfortable, and then you're out of the frying pan and into the fire, and then you realize how serious everything actually is. We do have reference to Harry's scar being on fire at the end of the Owls chapter. So is that sort of it? That we're coming out on the other side of all of these visions? I'm not quite sure, because I mean at this point in time, despite its pairing being beside the academic side of things, we are getting now to the climax, and it doesn't feel like our kids are out of the fire yet. In fact, it feels like they sort of just fell into it out of the frying pan. So the chapter name is definitely something that we should pay attention to. Overall, this seems to be an odd set of chapters to put together, simply because we do have, for the most part, a really academic chapter involving all the exams, all the owls. And then this sort of active chapter on the other side of trying to contact Sirius and all this plan and getting caught by Umbridge. But that's sort of the interesting thing, is we're seeing here a set of characteristics and characters who are attempting to think clearly under pressure, and in an academic setting are failing. But oddly enough, we're actually getting some relatively preemptive plans for a couple of these characters in the non-academic setting. We can have even Hermione just in a rage about her Ruins exam, and she's sure she did poorly on it. We've got other students who were messing up spells, including Harry and Ron, but not just them. We've got Malfoy, whose levitation charm fails, and we've got, is it Susan or Hannah? One of them, who, like, multiplies a bunch of ferrets into flamingos, and you're suddenly just like, oh. And this becomes, of course, a really good direct reference to the academic settings that actually do this to students. You should not have an academic pressure so immense that you are having students having mental breakdowns in their testing or in their classes. So the fact that we're seeing this relates very directly to someone like myself, who went through a lot of mental strife finishing up her BA. One of my favorite classes, I actually ended up missing a class simply because the professor asked me a question and I went blank. I started to panic, and the question was as simple as, like, dividing up into groups and, oh, whose group are you with? And I just and had to run to the washroom, and I just had a freak out, so much so that my professor actually sent me home. Her TA called for and paid for a taxi to send me home because I had had this breakdown in her class. So the fact that we're seeing this with students who are a good deal younger should mean a lot to us. This is not a setting in which people can think clearly. They're overly stressed, they're overly tired, they're being put through their paces far too much, especially since we then do have things like exams at night. or the interruptions like Hagrid getting attacked and McGonagall getting hit with 4 stunners. That is a trauma for these kids. They've just seen 2 of their professors attacked by their own ministry. And then you turn around and say, oh, you've got 5 more minutes left. No, those students aren't finishing that exam. Never mind the time loss, like, the mental state in that moment isn't happening. So why is it that our academic stresses are making it impossible to think straight, yet a bunch of these students in a life and death situation are handling it? Right now it doesn't seem like Harry is, but Harry is in a different mental state than everybody else. He really is sort of in the state that, like, Ginny was when she was in the Chamber of Secrets. He's not the one thinking clearly, because he's the one who's got his brain just stirred up a whole lot. But the fact that we've got Hermione, who's very clearly working through this plan, Ron backing it completely, like, right away, even Ginny and Luna coming in and, like, planning this out, Neville, who seems to be, of course, up to this point in time, our stereotype of Neville is this really meek, weak dude who's just involving himself to protect his friends. All of these people who we have seen struggling and compressing themselves in the academic setting and trying to think straight and failing are suddenly wonderfully able to come up with a plan on the fly, execute it really well, not fully, but again, this is students versus somebody who works at the ministry. You're expecting there to be a difference there. But the fact that they got that far is pretty amazing, simply for the fact that most of these students have got to be utterly exhausted after the stress they've gone through for the past 2 weeks. So the fact that they're able to actually execute this plan so much, and props to Hermione for just being able to think up a story on the fly about the weapon and contacting Dumbledore, and then be able to continue thinking up a story on the fly to then make sure that the Inquisitor squad does not come with them. That is very intense and not something that you'd expect from students who we are seeing have this mental breakdown in exams. Which says to me that somehow the pressure we're putting on these grades, notably with, of course, the fact that they got the career advice and they've been told the things they have to achieve to do it, and asshole things like Severus only accepting outstandings, when literally all the students perform better in his exam because he's not there. That pressure is more intense than a mad Dark Lord and the ministry that's losing their minds. That's terrifying, because the thing is, we might sometimes have ministries that seem to be losing their minds. We don't really have Dark Lords. We do have the academic standard that is making people have mental breakdowns. Our focus might be on the action. It might be on the fact that Sirius seems to be gone, Crutcher seems to know about it, Harry's freaking out, Umbridge has caught them. All our focus is on this, but there is a warning to the real-life standard we have with our academics. And it is not a positive warning. It is saying, literally, if kids can handle all of this, but they cannot handle the academic pressures, there is something wrong with our academic system. Not quite what I was expecting to be handling as we're heading in, you know, to the climax of this book, where you're expecting to focus on all this action, but that warning's there, and we need to take it seriously. Because that's going to ruin a lot more students than Dark Lords for us. With that said, though, don't be afraid to, like, fight the power man when the power needs to be fought. Whether or not that's the ministry, the government, academia. Sometimes we have to stand up for these things. And really seriously stand up for these things. Which is what these kids are doing right now. Though, maybe don't lead your headmaster / ministry worker to a giant. Maybe don't do that. Okay, I'm gonna keep reading, and I hope you do too. See you next time.